Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and we've gone into the many countries swapping out of the U.S. world reserve currency in the past. We're seeing that in places like Saudi Arabia and China. We're seeing that with countries like Iran, Turkey, and of course Russia. And Russia's a big one because, of course, we talked about how Russia has been in kind of like a power shift scenario trying to ensure their own wealth, which makes sense. They're trying to mine more gold. They're really focusing on gold. They've been focusing a lot on cryptocurrencies, interestingly enough. And of course, Russia isn't a big fan of the United States. The United States isn't a big fan of Russia. Lots of fear-mongering, lots of nonsense. Let's all remember that all governments are organized crime rackets. But with that said, Russia has been unjustly accused by the United States media of, collusion and doing all the stuff that the U.S. Does, but way more than they do. Of course, the hypocrisy is strong, and I want to mention this Bloomberg article because I find this rather interesting considering the series of events that we've seen in the past, especially year, with countries trying to break free from the U.S. world reserve currency as we see a huge loss in faith. And the potential for China as well to rise up as a new world reserve currency, which we've talked about lots before. But anyway, as the article says, U.S. shooting itself with steps that harm dollar, Putin says. And as the article goes into, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the U.S. is shooting itself not in the foot, but a bit higher with sanctions and other steps that undermine confidence in the dollar. And I quote, "We aren't ditching the dollar. The dollar is ditching us," he told the VTB Capital Forum in Moscow Wednesday. The instability of dollar payments is creating a desire for many global economies to find alternative reserve currencies and create settlement systems independent of the dollar. We're not the only ones doing it, believe me. Putin said recent steps to find alternatives to the dollar in trade have been paying off, noting that a contract to deliver S-400 air defense missiles to Turkey, which has been criticized by the U.S., was conducted without using the greenback. Russia is also working with partner countries to develop an alternative to the SWIFT financial messaging system after threats that the country's access could be targeted through sanctions. Russia has been reducing its holdings of treasuries and trying to find alternatives to the dollar in trade to protect itself from increasingly unpredictable U.S. sanctions. On Tuesday, the country also sold a foreign currency bond in euros for the first time in more than a decade. So there's a lot to go into here. John, I find it interesting that there's a lot of talk about, Russia working with Turkey and using, going outside of the greenback to trade. We reported on stories in the past on Russia trying to break free from that system. There's also a massive European payment system outside of the US dollar that was just established recently with the help of people like Angela Merkel. So in no ways better than the system. It all goes back to the same fiat nonsense. But John, what do you think about this recent story?
Well, it's just another nail in the US dollar coffin. It's just what has been going on for the last 100 years is the start of an empire. You get the rise through the printing of money, and then you get the fall at this debt saturation, at credit saturation, and then it just falls down in value. Now, what we're currently seeing is, of course, the M0, the monetary supply, where now it's reverting in the United States, where everybody has been, of course, buying the US dollar. Everybody's been buying into it. And now you're seeing the U.S. is trying to exit out of their mass amounts of balance sheet holdings that the Fed has. Mm-hmm. They're trying to sell that back to the banks. So the banks are actually paying them back with cash. And that's why you're seeing the M0 starting to go down. So actually the US dollar is kind of a little bit strengthening right now because of that. But in the general sense, the US dollar has lost over 98% of its value. Same with most fiat currencies all around the world, including the Ruble, including the Chinese Yuan. All these currencies have been printed into oblivion. So there's nothing different from them and the US dollar. That everything is together right now, and everybody is kind of hitting the peak debt levels. Now, I think some countries are not as saturated with debt as others. For example, India and a couple others where they're just developing countries that will, try to use their They only have rich and poor, so they're trying to use all this credit to create a consuming middle class in a lot of these countries.
It'll catch up to them.
Yeah, that's what they're trying. But again, you create that middle class, yeah, but then you get to the point where there's no more debt to borrow out to the middle class because they have car loans, they have student loans, they have mortgages, they have personal loans. Like they're so oversaturated with debt that you see in most Western countries like Australia, Norway, Britain, all over to Europe, North America, US, and Canada. All of them have a mass amount of debt, and we kind of reached a peak debt level that is possible. And I think what's going to happen is everybody's going to move away. There's going to be a couple of people that have been trying to set themselves up, but the problem is I think there's bankers behind the governments here as well that have the interest of setting themselves up as winners. Now, of course, you have China that have, according to, I was just listening to Bill Halter, Jim Willey's partner in crime, and he was saying from his numbers that he'd been looking at, it's more like right now the official number of gold holdings from China is 1,000, but with all the gold that have been flowing in through their sovereign wealth fund accounts, they have a lot of proxy sovereign wealth funds that funnel gold into the country. Plus, they haven't shipped up any gold from their mining. He said it's more closer to between 20 to 25,000 tons, which is we're talking about 3 times more than the official U.S. number, which now they're starting to doubt a lot of the UK and the U.S. holdings because recently Venezuela tried to get their gold from the UK, and the UK says like, hey, we can't give it to you. So
of course.
It just shows, and it's the same with Germany trying to repatriate their gold. They barely got it back. It took them.
And that was the second biggest
5
gold
years.
repatriation in history, I believe.
Yeah, but that's what you're seeing now. The countries are seeing a lot of risk in the US dollar. The US dollar is bankrupt, of course, but it's together. Like we gotta understand, the US dollar is kind of the one world currency, but then every single other currency comes underneath there. And unless you have something to protect the loss of value in that currency, it's not going to happen. I think we're going to see a push towards a one world currency before anything during the next calamity that's coming now. And I think we're going to see the SDR popping up as that, of course, number one candidate, because
of course
the IMF could they printed actually a lot of money during the 2008 crisis, like a lot of SDRs, and then allocated them throughout the world. I see them because they don't hold any assets on their balance sheets. They don't have any real liabilities. They actually hold some gold as well. They are going to be the bailout of last resort now because there's nobody else to bail out these bankrupt central banks.
Of course. And John, I mean, assets. It's interesting because these countries are always quick to throw stones at each other. Same with the banks. I mean, we saw U.S. Sanctions, for example, on Russia that devastated the economy earlier this year. That really, really affected their economy. And of course, Russia is doing the same thing back. There's sanctions, and there's always this attempt to, sacrifice the populace, the pawns, I guess you could say, for the sake of the bankers and the governments, these organized crime cartels, and it's always an organized crime cartel. And I mean, we see China rising to try and beat out the U.S. for voting power at the SDR, the IMF talking about putting their headquarters in Beijing, China in coming years, which we've been talking about for about a year and a half now, of course. And of course, China is really trying to rise up as a new global superpower. And I mean, Russia has been working side by side with China, which is a very dystopian country. So as much as I could say I prefer Russia over the United States, just because they're not in every country in the world killing millions of people and all that kind of stuff. It's like picking what kind of cancer you prefer better. Would you like brain cancer or do you prefer pancreatic cancer? Whichever one's less bad, I'll take that. No. I would prefer no cancer at all. And I want to go into this a bit with you, John, because we will be doing a comprehensive report in the coming days, hopefully on the Central African Republic, because they are facing huge problems right now. And in the past, and this all connects, the IMF have loaned countries more money than they can afford to pay back. They've devastated places throughout Latin America and throughout the world, really. But, reaching this conflict today we see with immigration and all that, a lot of it stems from the impoverishment of the IMF destroying these countries and the governments, and then these governments destroying the populace in debt servitude, of course. But then China, we also reported on recently, and loaning way more money to different African countries than they can afford to pay back. And that has devastated a lot of African countries. And now we have this article out of Zero Hedge. Russian bank Fatfinger gives poor African country loan equal to 6 times its GDP. And as the article kind of goes into, it says the impoverished state of Central African Republic, one of the poorest countries in the world, landed a paper windfall on Tuesday when Russian state bank VTB reported it had lent the country $12 billion, or more than 6 times the country's entire GDP. But the bank then said it was a clerical error, Fatfinger, and there was no such loan. According to Reuters, the loan was mentioned in a quarterly VTB financial report published by the Russian Central Bank, which included a table listing the outstanding financial claims that VTB Group had on dozens of countries as of October 1st this year. There, in the table next to Central African Republic, was a sum of $801 billion, $933,814,000, or rubles, I should say, or $12 billion, more than 6 times the country's annual economic output of 1.95 billion. Man, that's a bad GDP. So, John, so it always comes down to these banks and governments always manipulating things, always playing with debt, always trying to create debt servitude, always trying to basically own everything, and as you kind of went into in the past, and then own nothing, which it always seems to be the inevitable case. All fiat currencies revert to zero. But John, what do you think about this? I mean, we'll go deeper into the Central African Republic coming up in the next week or so, into its history and everything. But what do you think about this massive inflationary event and, these predatory banks kind of making the best of, people's suffering and pain?
Well, that's what banks do, Josh. They siphon off money off of the world's markets, and of course, nothing is better than having lending money out to somebody that is going to take that money for themselves, and then there's no money for the actual populace. It's the IMF's business plan, basically,
Their
what
playbook.
they've been doing for a long time, and China has been doing it now. We were talking about Zambia, how they literally had to give up their airport and their hydro company, their monopoly there. They had to give them over because they defaulted on debt. And then that's what you're going to see with the Central African Republic as well. It's right now it's at 38.04% inflation rate, and that's of course the official one. Who knows how much the real one is? And what's interesting is that's actually the 5th highest in the world, only behind Venezuela, Sudan, South Sudan, Argentina. So it's they're in great company up there, of course, with the rest of the with the rest of the governments that can't pay their bills. But that doesn't surprise anyone, because that's what this is all about. It's about indebting people. It's about getting into as much debt as possible, and then you just take all the assets when it's over. When somebody goes bankrupt, it just comes back to the banks and to the asset owners, which is the guys that possess all this printed money for nothing that they've accumulated, and now they're buying up everything around the world. I actually want to mention something, Josh, because there's something going on right now that is very important. There's 2 huge topics here that are happening on the Western side, but also there's like Chinese involvement here as well, and that is the New York Times mentioning the world's new top bank cop faces stress test of his own, and what is just talking about, it's the new head of the Financial Stability Board, and his name is Randall Quarles, and he used to be the vice chair at the Federal Reserve, actually, just recently, and he jumped ship
Nice.
over to the Financial Stability Board.
But he's a great guy.
Yeah, and the Financial Stability Board is the standard setting body for all the different legislations that are coming out now. They thought that the IMF is a pile of democratic garbage, and they wanted something more tyrannical, so they created the FSB. And the FSB is put together by the top central bankers in the world. Mario Draghi and a whole bunch of others sit there, and then they put forward policies that they're going to implement into the economy. For example, they created the bail-in legislation that was pushed out through the G20. So that's what happens is you got the Financial Stability Board. They push out new legislation to the G20, and then that legislation gets implemented in all countries. It was pretty easy to see when they put out the bail-in legislation. Suddenly, all the G20 countries had it very rapidly, and it's like, very surprising there. And then, of course, we're talking about the living will and all these different tests, whatever policies. All of them come from the Financial Stability Board, and the actual Financial Stability Board controls other. Under them, you have something called the standard setting bodies, and the standard setting bodies is the securities in all the countries. It's the financial regulators. So it's all the regulators in different financial markets that they control on top of that as well. So it's a huge conglomerate of a very tiny little piece of people that write the legislation for the whole world. And there's no democratic, involvement at all. There's nobody that could vote on anything, or it's just get passed up.
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, and what does this teach us, folks? I think it's pretty clear what it teaches us. We have these entities that are dependent on the dependence of the masses, and as long as you are in debt servitude to them, they have you right where they want you, and they are built up to screw people over and push people into debt servitude. And we see that with even bail-in regimes coming in, and the centrally planned cashless society where all your money is always being wired to the banking system and never in your hands, and it's never your money, it's always a bank's. And what happens then? Well, Mario Draghi says he wants to end depositor insurance, so therefore you can't even get the pittance amount that you would usually be able to get if the bank ran off with all of your hard-earned money. I mean, does this not tip people off that the banking system and the government is out to indebt people and push people into servitude? I mean, does this not tell you that you as an individual need to break free from that system and be self-sustainable and financially responsible and financially educated and prepare for yourself? I mean, just apart from, food, water, shelter, and self-defense, people should be looking at ways to ensure their wealth, protect their purchasing power. Gold and silver, in my opinion, as wealth insurance. And then, of course, decentralized cryptocurrencies that have fundamental value. There's so much that people need to learn from these stories that I feel like people are allowing to pass on to the horizon instead of actually consider the real world problems that are coming on our doorstep. And regardless of if it's Russia, the United States, China, India, wherever you are in the world, folks, this is on your doorstep. All fiat currencies end up worth nothing, and it will affect you, whether it be inflation or the complete enforced usury by legal tender laws. There's no competition of currencies in the market. Folks, this is evidence that you are being used as a pawn, as a slave, and you as an individual need to break free from that. And there's so many solutions, as we've gone into so often here at WHAM. You need to break free from these organized crime rackets. John, what do you think as we close this off as your bottom line? I mean, this just always continues to pile up on top of itself, and it just goes on for an eternity, and people don't learn.
Of course they don't. History always repeats itself because during one or two generations, the common understanding and memory has been lost of what the past was like. So it's pretty natural that we constantly repeat this throughout history, and we forget how evil the bankers were, and then they come back again, take over, and it's just a constant cycle forth and back. Now, Josh, what we got to mention here, I was mentioning the Financial Stability Board, but what's even more important of a huge event that's happening right now is the G20 is taking place in a day and a half from right now. As we're doing this video, and I'm just watching all the leaders of the world, flashing by on their webpage. I see Putin, I see Trump, like all of them are going to attend this, and there's going to be big clash between
All the
China,
mob
of
bosses.
course, and the U.S. because China is saying that the U.S. is manipulating the currency. The U.S. is saying that China is manipulating their currency. So it's
Well, no kidding, they all are.
yeah, it's who has the cheapest currency right now, so they could get some short-term benefits for the economy selling more stuff because more people want to produce stuff in the cheap economy. But then on the other side, you're destroying the economy locally with inflation. But what is happening here, Josh? Remember how I was saying the Financial Stability Board and the G20. So the Financial Stability Board comes up with new policies usually during G20 meetings, and there's so much happening in the world economy right now that we should pay close attention to announcements coming up right away, because it's about a day and a half away, and I'll make sure I keep a big eye on this, because there's probably going to be some stuff coming up, because we're getting close to that precipice, and it's going to be a while until the next G20 meeting again. So I think we're going to see some stuff that might be in the shadows, and nobody might talk too much about it, but it's definitely worth paying attention to what's happening in Argentina. And of course, in Argentina, Josh, that's such a joke as well, having the G20 meeting there in Argentina. Has the third highest inflation in the world, and an interest rate of 62%, and the inflation rate is just continuing to go up. And
it's happened a million times there.
Yeah, and they are, of course, the worst when it comes to having a fiat currency in the world. They have about 5 devaluations and 5 hyperinflation throughout the last 100 years. And that's the best place to have it.
Just keep renaming it the peso. No one will notice.
No, but it makes sense, though, to have it there, because that's what Ben Bernanke, as I said in his 2002 speech, said. We got to buy up everything. We got to make sure that we never get deflation, and we got to print as much money as possible to just keep that from happening. But you can continue to print money, and you'll never go bankrupt. But the problem is the populace will say, like, I'm not taking this worthless piece of garbage currency that you have anymore. It's not buying me anything. I'm losing all my wealth stored up, so I'm gonna take something else, and that's when the whole currency system collapses. And that's what you're seeing with the whole push on the US dollar, people exiting left, right, and center from it. It's just a natural outcome of the death cycle of a cycle of fiat currency. We're at the death throes of the US dollar and the US empire, and that's the way it is now. Everybody's fighting over becoming the new hegemon. On top of that, you have the UN with the IMF trying to take over one world, new world order. So we gotta resist it. We gotta just say, like, I don't want this currency anymore. We gotta exit out of the banking system, exit and be decentralized away from the huge risks that are coming in the economy in the coming years here, because it's not going to be pleasant, folks, unfortunately, and that's what we need to be aware of, and then protect ourselves, as what we've been talking about so many times, Josh.
Yeah, they're all a bunch of criminals. They're all just disgusting, disgraceful criminals. And they are impeding on every individual liberty you can imagine. And yes, the banks are, through fractional reserve lending, enforcing that debt via usury, through legal tender laws on the populace. It's horrible. And we'll be watching this meeting coming up very closely. And there's so much going on. Powell's announcement that maybe they won't need to raise interest rates as much as he thought they would. And
that'd be terrible, actually. That'd be very bad for the economy.
It's all bad. It's all manipulation. Let's just get this over with already. It should have fallen so long ago. The more we prop it up, the worse it's going to be. Let's get this over with. It's so absolutely insane. The old guard is done. These delusional psychopaths that are propping up the system need to realize that their days are done, and their idea of completely pushing everyone into complete debt slavery is over. It's coming to an end. We know it. The age of information has a lot to say about this. We might have seen it before, but this time we got the internet, we got the information, we got the knowledge, and it's up to us as free individuals. So folks, decentralize everything, rule yourself. Thanks for going into this with us, John, and until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth.
Be the change.
Like what you see here, OM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored on YouTube. As these guys come in and flag all of our content, as hate speech. Also, check out our Bitcoin address below as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also check us out at steemit.com. We're at Josh Sigurdson. It's a future of social media where you get paid in the upvote of your post in cryptocurrency. Steem, that is. So make sure to check us out there. Make sure to join us at Anarchapulco 2019 with people like Ron Paul, G. Edward Griffin, of course, Jeff Berwick, Vid Jedlicka. So many incredible speakers are going to be speaking. It's just a massively growing event. It is something you have to see to believe. So make sure to check it out below and save money on your tickets by using promo code WAM, that's WAM, and I hope to see you there. Also, check out our newsletter as we are getting demonetized and censored and all that. We don't know what comes next, so we have an email, worldalternativemedia@gmail.com. Send us an email with subject line YES, YES, and we will include you in the newsletter where we will continuously keep you updated. So until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.
Wow.